They laughed when Mara Reed sealed the last crack in her 286-square-foot cabin. They said the Maine winter would flatten it before February, but when the worst ice storm in 40 years came screaming through the North Woods, that little one-room shack did not collapse. It held. And when the floor buckled under her stove on the fifth night, it exposed the one thing her dead husband's brother had spent years trying to steal from her, not the land, not the timber, the reason his family had been afraid of those woods for nearly a century. Reed was 44 years old when she drove north with everything she owned in the back of a borrowed pickup. 2 plastic totes of clothes, a dented toolbox, 3 boxes of canned food, and a manila envelope full of final notices from hospitals, collection agencies, and the bank that had just taken the little house she and Jonah had spent 12 years paying for. Jonah had been gone 11 months. Pancreatic cancer had taken him fast. Then the bills had taken everything slower. By October, Mara had one asset left in the world, 37 acres of black spruce, glacial rock, and frozen bog outside Jackman, Maine. The land had come from her mother's side of the family. Nobody wanted it. Nobody had lived there since the 1930s. On paper, it was nearly worthless. No road access for half the year. No utilities. No septic. No clean driveway, and no structure except a collapsed trapper's camp and a fieldstone root cellar that looked like a grave someone had forgotten to finish. To Mara, it was not worthless. It was the last place the bank could not touch. So she did what desperate people do when there is nowhere left to retreat. She stopped retreating. She cashed out the last of Jonah's work tools, bought salvage lumber from a barn demolition in Farmington, dragged home windows pulled from a condemned motel, and began building a cabin small enough for one woman to heat with one stove. The locals noticed immediately. At the diner, men in orange hunting caps shook their heads over coffee. At the feed store, a clerk asked whether she had a death wish or a YouTube channel. But the loudest voice belonged to Dane Reed, Jonah's older brother. Dane arrived one afternoon in late October while Mara was balancing a warped cedar board across 2 sawhorses, trying to cut it straight with a saw blade that needed replacing. He stepped out of his black SUV, wearing a spotless parka and boots that had never seen mud. "Mara," he said, looking at the half-framed walls as if they smelled bad. "This has gone far enough." She kept measuring. Dane walked closer. "You're grieving. I understand that. But this is not brave. It's embarrassing." Mara lowered the pencil. "What do you want?" "I want you alive," he said. "And I want you to stop pretending a shed in the woods is a plan." He pulled a folded purchase agreement from inside his coat. "I'll give you $18,000 for the whole parcel. Cash. Today. You can clear some debt, rent a place in town, and start over somewhere that has heat." Mara looked at the paper, then at him. 18,000 for 37 acres. Dane smiled thinly. 37 useless acres. "Then why do you want it?" His expression changed for half a second, only half a second. Then the smile came back. "I'm trying to help you, because Jonah was my brother." Mara picked up the saw. "Jonah loved this place," she said. "Wanted to come up here when he got better. He never would have brought you here," Dane snapped. "Because Jonah had sense." Mara did not answer. Dane looked at the cabin frame, at the old stones under it, at the black mouth of the ruined root cellar. "You have no power, no plumbing, no foundation inspection. That roof angle is ridiculous. When the snow loads up, this box is going to fold around you." He shoved the purchase agreement against a wall stud, "Sign before the weather signs it for you." Then he drove away. Mara left the paper hanging there for 2 days. Not because she was tempted. Because every time the wind hit it and made it flap, it sounded like a dare. By Thanksgiving, the shell was up. The cabin was ugly in a way Mara had grown proud of. It leaned slightly toward the pines. The siding was 3 different colors. The roof was patched with standing seam metal from an old bait shop, and the windows did not match. Inside, every inch had to earn its place. A cot folded against one wall, a shelf held food, lanterns, a first aid kit, and Jonah's coffee mug. A bucket sink drained into a gravel trench outside. The real luxury was a small cast-iron marine stove she had bought from a boatyard in Belfast, sanded, resealed, and bolted onto a slab of salvaged slate. The stove sat over the oldest part of the place, a square of thick pine boards Mara had laid across the fieldstone cellar mouth. That stonework mattered to her. Her great-grandmother, Elsie Wren, had lived on this land in 1934, after the logging camps closed and before the county road was finished. Family stories said Elsie was stubborn, quiet, and impossible to scare. They also said she left the property suddenly one winter and never returned. Nobody knew why. Like the idea that the stones under her floor had been placed by someone who had also refused to be pushed. The warnings kept coming. Clyde Bouchard, the hardware store owner, refused to ring up her stovepipe until he had said his piece. "Listen to me," he said, tapping the counter with one knuckle. "Cold is not the thing that kills people up here. Confidence is. You get ice on those trees, wind behind it, and a drift against that north wall, you'll be trapped before you know you're in trouble." Mara nodded. "I know." "No, you don't," Clyde said. "People think small cabins are safer because they're easier to heat. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're coffins with windows." She bought the pipe anyway. All through December, Mara worked until her hands split. She cut deadfall. She stacked wood under a tarp. She sealed wall gaps with sheep's wool and expanding foam. She hung storm plastic inside the windows and lined the north wall with stacked firewood until it looked like a barricade. At night, when the forest went black, the fear got louder. The cabin made new sounds as it settled. The trees knocked against each other in the dark. Sometimes the stove clicked as it cooled, and Mara would wake convinced someone was stepping across the floor. Get up, touch Jonah's mug on the shelf, and force herself to breathe. She was not peaceful. She was not heroic. She was just out of options. The storm mornings began on January 23rd. At first, the radio called it a complicated winter system. By the next morning, the language had changed. Historic ice accretion, severe wind, life-threatening cold, extended power outages, impossible travel. Mara counted her food twice. She carried the last of the wood inside. She filled every jug, pan, and plastic bin with water. She screwed 2 extra braces across the door and wedged a support post under the roof beam. The first freezing rain arrived after dark. It sounded almost gentle, a soft ticking on metal, a whisper on glass. Then the temperature dropped, and the whisper hardened. By midnight, the whole cabin was encased in a shining skin of ice. By dawn, the trees were bending under the weight. Mara stood at the window and watched a young spruce bough until its top touched the snow. Then it snapped. The crack rolled through the woods like a rifle shot. After that, the forest began breaking apart. Branches exploded under the ice. Whole trees split and fell. Wind pushed through the timber with a low, grinding howl. Not like air but like something huge dragging its body across the ridge. Inside, the stove fought for her life. Mara fed it small, steady pieces of wood, afraid to burn too hot and afraid not to burn hot enough. Frost formed along the nail heads in the wall. Her breath turned white if she stepped away from the stove. The kettle froze to the shelf beside the door. On the second night, the first heavy limb hit the roof. The entire cabin jumped. Mara dropped the can of beans she was opening. It rolled across the floor and disappeared under the cot. She stood frozen, listening. The roof groaned, then held. A second limb hit an hour later, then a third. By the third day, the door was buried halfway up. Ice had sealed the window frame shut. The radio died in the middle of a weather update, leaving only a cough of static and then nothing. Mara slept in fragments, 20 minutes at a time, sitting in a chair beside the stove with her boots on and the hatchet across her lap. Every sound became a prediction. The click of a nail, the bend of a beam, the pop of ice splitting outside. Dane's voice came back to her again and again, "This box is going to fold around you." On the fourth night, the wind changed direction. It came out of the northwest, straight across the bog, hard enough to drive powder through cracks Mara had sealed twice. The cabin began to vibrate. Not shake, vibrate. A low tremor passed through the boards under her feet. The stovepipe rattled in its collar. The tin cup on the table slid sideways and dropped. Then something beneath the floor moved. It was not loud at first. A deep scrape, stone against stone. Mara grabbed the edge of the table. The floor under the stove lifted. Just an inch. Then another. The heavy marine stove tilted forward. The pipe bent. A thin line of smoke leaked from the joint near the ceiling. Mara's body understood before her mind did. If that stove tipped, the coals would spill. If the pipe tore loose, the cabin would fill with smoke. The door. The storm would take the heat in seconds. She was not trapped by the weather anymore. She was trapped by the thing keeping her alive. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She threw on gloves, grabbed the pry bar, and dropped to her knees beside the slate. The pine boards around the stove had buckled where the cellar stones beneath them had shifted. The old root cellar was collapsing upward and sideways at the same time, forced by frozen ground, ice pressure, and the pounding wind. Mara jammed the pry bar into a seam and pulled. The board did not move. She pulled harder, shoulder screaming. The seam split. Up from below, damp and rotten and sharp enough to hurt her teeth. She tore up one board, then another. Beneath the floor, her flashlight showed chaos, slumped stones, frozen dirt, a support block pushed out of line, and a gap under the slate big enough to swallow her arm. She had to reset the support. There was no one else. Mara lay flat on the floor and reached into the black cellar space, clawing at ice-cemented dirt with a gloved hand. She dragged out stones, one by one, shoved smaller rocks under the lifted joist, and used the pry bar as a lever until her palms went numb. The stove leaned another fraction. A coal slid inside with a soft, metallic hiss. Mara forced the pry bar deeper, searching for purchase. The steel tip struck something below the dirt. Not stone, not wood. Metal. The sound was hollow. Clean. Wrong. She stopped breathing. Outside, the storm hammered the cabin. Inside, the stovepipe groaned. Mara scraped with the pry bar again. The tip rang against the hidden object a second time. She dug faster. Frozen clay broke loose in black chunks. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskins so old it had become part of the earth, was the corner of a box. A narrow iron box. Not a toolbox. Not a trap. Something hidden. Something placed. Mara knew she should ignore it. The stove was still tipping. The smoke line was still leaking. But survival and curiosity were not separate anymore. Whatever the cellar had coughed up was jammed exactly where her support needed to go. She chipped around it, hooked the pry bar under one edge, and lifted. The box did not move. She screamed once, from effort more than fear, and threw her weight backward. The frozen ground released with a wet crack. Mara fell onto her back, dragging the iron box up through the broken floorboards. It landed beside her boot with a heavy, final thud. For a moment, she only stared. The box was no larger than a bread drawer, but it looked dense enough to anchor a boat. Its sides were black with age. A rusted hasp crossed the front. A strip of green canvas clung to one corner like dead skin. Above it, the cabin shuddered. Mara slapped herself back into motion. She shoved the box aside, crawled to the gap, and worked until the support block locked under the joist. Drove wedges of stone into place with the back of the hatchet. The floor slowly settled. The stove returned to level. The pipe straightened enough for the smoke to draw. Only then did Mara sit back against the wall. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to tuck them under her arms. The storm had opened the floor, but it had not killed her. And now there was a locked iron box sitting in the firelight. The hasp was rusted almost smooth. Mara struck it with the hatchet. Once. Twice. On the third blow, the metal snapped. The lid resisted, then screamed open. The smell that came out was old paper, cold iron, and something faintly sweet, like oilcloth sealed for too many decades. Inside were three things. A leather ledger wrapped in waxed linen, 6 canvas packets tied with blackened cord, and a flat bundle of documents sealed in a tin sleeve. Mara reached for the ledger first. The cover cracked when she opened it. On the first page, in brown ink, was a name she had heard since childhood. Elsie Wren. February 9, 1934. Mara brought the book close to the lantern. The first line made her skin go cold. If this box is found, let it be known, I did not run from this land because winter beat me.
Outside faded behind the words. Elsie had not been a frightened widow who abandoned a failed camp. She had been the bookkeeper for the North Kennebec Timber Cooperative, the only woman trusted to record payroll, land contracts, and winter credit for dozens of logging families. In January of 1934, a county warden named Malachi Reed and 2 company men had staged a robbery at the co-op office. The public story was simple. Desperate drifters stole payroll gold, burned the account books, and fled toward Canada. Elsie's ledger said the drifters never existed. Malachi Reed had taken the money. More importantly, he had taken the original land contracts for 23 families who had been buying their parcels on credit. Without those documents, the company could declare the families in default, seize the timber, and sell the rights to a paper mill syndicate. Elsie found out because Malachi's men hid the stolen records in an abandoned sled shed behind the cookhouse, so she stole them back. Mara turned the pages with trembling fingers. Elsie had carried the payroll coins, the contracts, and her own written proof through a snow squall to this land. She buried the box under the root cellar, beneath the stove pad, because no search party would tear apart a floor while a fire was burning over it. Then Malachi Reed spread the story that Elsie was unstable. He told the town she had stolen the payroll. He tried to starve her off the property. Elsie's final entry was dated February 14th. I am leaving before dawn for Augusta with the ledger. If I make it, Malachi answers. If I do not, the truth is under the stones. Elsie never made it. Family history said she had been found 2 counties away in spring, dead from exposure, her name stained by rumor. Mara had grown up thinking her great-grandmother was a tragedy. Now she understood. Elsie had been carrying the truth. Then Mara saw the list of names on the last page. Malachi Reed, her late husband's great-grandfather. Dane Reed's bloodline. Dane had not wanted a useless parcel. He had wanted the box his family had failed to find. Mara opened one of the canvas packets with fingers that barely worked. Gold spilled into her lap. Not jewelry. Not trinkets. Stacks of old U.S. wrapped in brittle paper, each marked with a bank stamp from 1933. The firelight touched them, and the whole cabin seemed to change temperature. The second packet held more. The third held more. The tin sleeve held the original co-op contracts, the stolen deed assignments, and a map with Elsie's tight handwriting marking every parcel Malachi Reed had planned to strip. Mara sat on the broken floor, surrounded by proof, while the storm tried to peel the roof away. Dane had told her the cabin would fold around her. He had not been warning her. He had been waiting. For 3 more days, the ice storm locked the woods shut. Mara kept the box under her cot, wrapped in Jonah's old coat. She rationed wood to fist-sized pieces. She melted snow in a pan. She slept with the ledger against her chest like it was a living thing. The cabin made it. Barely. One roof seam tore loose and screamed all night. A tree fell across the north wall and held there, pressing but not breaking through. The stove smoked whenever the wind shifted. But the one-room shack stayed standing, because Mara had overbuilt every ugly inch of it. On the 7th morning, she woke to silence. Not peace. Silence. The kind that feels unnatural after days of violence. She opened her eyes and saw blue light through the ice-choked window. The stove was almost out. The air was bitter. Her joints ached like she had aged 10 years. When she tried the door, it did not move. The storm had buried the cabin nearly to the eaves. Mara laughed once. It came out cracked and strange. Then she got the shovel. It took nearly 5 hours to dig upward from inside the cabin. First through the door gap, then through a tunnel of packed snow and broken ice. Twice the tunnel collapsed. Once she had to back out on her elbows, while panic clawed at her throat. But she did not stop. At last, the shovel punched through into sunlight. Mara dragged herself out onto the snowpack, and lay there under a sky so blue it looked painted. The roof line of her cabin showed. The stovepipe stuck up like a black finger from the white. All around her, the forest glittered with ice. Beautiful. Ruined. Alive. An hour later, she heard engines. 2 snowmobiles appeared between the broken trees, their tracks carving across the crusted snow. The first carried a deputy. The second carried Clyde Bouchard from the hardware store. Behind them, riding in a rescue sled like a man arriving for a funeral he had rehearsed, was Dane Reed. He climbed off before the machines stopped. His face was arranged into grief. I told her, he called out to the deputy. I begged her to come back. This would happen. The deputy looked toward the Barry cabin. We need to dig it out first. Dane shook his head slowly, as if the sight hurt him. She had no next of kin up here. Jonah's gone. I can help with the estate. The land should be secured before scavengers hear about this. Clyde turned sharply. Scavengers? Dane did not answer him. He was staring at the roof, calculating. Then Mara spoke from above them. You always did move fast, when you thought something was dead. Dane spun around. Mara stood on the snowpack behind the cabin, soot on her face, her hair shoved under a wool cap, both hands wrapped in filthy bandages. She held Elsie Wren's ledger. For the first time since Mara had known him, Dane Reed looked honestly afraid. Mara, he said, my God, you're alive. So is the cabin. The deputy started toward her. Are you hurt? Not badly. Mara kept her eyes on Dane. The floor gave me more trouble than the roof. Dane's mouth tightened. Mara stepped down the tunnel ramp she had carved, especially under the stove. The color drained from his face so quickly that Clyde saw it. What did you find? Dane asked. His voice was too sharp, too hungry. Mara held out the ledger to the deputy. Something your family lost. Dane lunged one step forward. The deputy put a hand on his chest. Back up. Mara opened the ledger to the final page. Malachi Reed, she said. County Warden, February 1934. Maimed by Elsie Wren as the man who stole payroll gold and land contracts from the North Kennebec Timber Cooperative. Dane's eyes flicked toward the cabin, then toward the tunnel, then toward the deputy's hand on his chest. Mara's voice hardened. You didn't offer me $18,000 because you felt sorry for me. You offered it because your family knew Elsie hid the evidence somewhere on this land. You were hoping Winter would do what you couldn't. Dane tried to laugh. No sound came out. Clyde looked at him with disgust. He took the ledger, scanned 3 lines, and closed it carefully. Mr. Reed, he said, you're riding back with me. The story hit Jackman before the roads fully reopened. By the end of the week, state investigators had taken the iron box, the ledger, the canvas packets, and the tin sleeve into evidence. Historians confirmed Elsie's handwriting from old town records. A numismatic firm authenticated the coins,
nearly 300 pre-1933 gold pieces, many still in original bank paper. The deed packets proved that Malachi Reed and his partners had illegally stripped land from families whose descendants still lived in the county. The legal fight lasted 18 months.
Mara did not win everything. Stories like this are never that clean. Some coins went to state custody while ownership was sorted out. Some contracts reopened old claims. Some descendants received restitution. A museum acquired Elsie's ledger under an agreement that put her name where it belonged. Not as a thief, not as a madwoman, but as the witness who tried to save a town from being robbed in plain sight. Mara's share was still life-changing. Enough to clear Jonah's medical debt. Enough to rebuild the road. Enough to keep the land forever. As for Dane Reed, the evidence did not send him to prison for Malachi's crimes. Exposed why he had stalked Mara's property, pressured her to sell, and arrived at the storm site ready to manage an estate before he had seen a body. His investors left. His partners sued. His name became a warning people used in quiet sentences. And one rainy morning the next fall, Dane signed over the last of his company's timber options at a price so low it looked like surrender. Mara did not tear down the 286-square-foot cabin. She hired engineers, then builders, then a local crew who had once laughed at the slope of her roof, lifted the damaged shack, rebuilt the cellar beneath it, reinforced the original stones, and enclosed the whole thing inside a larger timber frame home. The cabin remained at the center, not polished, not restored into something cute. The broken floorboards stayed under glass. The stove stayed bolted to the slate, the scorched wall, the patched roof seam, the tunnel door, all of it remained visible. Because Mara wanted people to understand what had saved her. Not money, not luck. A small shelter built carefully because a desperate woman could not afford to build twice. The following winter, people came up the plowed road, carrying pies, coffee, and awkward apologies. I'd stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the little cabin inside the big house. I was wrong about one thing, he said. Mara smiled. Only one. He nodded toward the stove. Small doesn't always mean weak. Mara looked at the old stones beneath the glass. She thought of Elsie Wren walking into a storm with proof under her coat. She thought of Jonah, who had wanted to see the land in spring. She thought of Dane, waiting for winter to finish what greed had started. Then she put one hand on the rough cabin wall. The locals had said the storm would swallow it whole. Instead, the storm gave the land its memory back, and that some foundations do not fail just because everyone stops believing in them. Some foundations wait. If this story had you holding your breath, share it with someone who knows what it means to be underestimated. And tell me this, if you found a locked box under your floor while a storm was trying to kill you, would you open it?